Book 1, The Fall and the Exile. First, in the hidden chronicles of the prophet Jeremiah. Long before the isles of the West knew the sound of the gospel, before Rome built her legions, and before the northern clans carved their stones, the world shook beneath the fall of Jerusalem. The year was one of smoke and sorrow. Babylon had spread her wings like a devouring eagle, and the city of David was broken, her walls cast down, her treasures scattered like dust upon the wind. The people groaned beneath chains, led eastward into exile, their songs turned to lamentations beside the rivers of Babylon. Yet not all was lost. For in that time of ruin, the Most High preserved a remnant, a seed of promise, hidden from the eyes of kings. Among them was Jeremiah, the weeping prophet, burdened with visions of both judgment and hope. He had spoken of uprooting and tearing down, but also of planting anew. Though despised in his own city, though beaten, mocked, and cast into a pit, he bore within his heart a word that could not be silenced. The covenant of David would not be broken, though thrones toppled and nations fell. It was whispered in those darkest days that Jeremiah carried with him not only the scrolls of prophecy, but treasures unspoken, a daughter of royal blood, the harp of David, and a stone sanctified by Jacob's dream at Bethel. These he guarded as one guards the embers of a dying fire, lest the line of kings be extinguished forever. And so it was that Jeremiah's path would not end in Babylon nor in the ruins of Judah, but in journeys unmarked upon the common maps of men. The sea winds would one day bear him westward, to lands unknown, to the isles afar off of which the prophets had spoken. There, beyond the edge of the world, the covenant would take root again. This, then, is the hidden chronicle, a tale not told in the scrolls of kings, nor in the annals of Babylon, but carried in the whispers of bards, the carvings of forgotten stones, and the memories of those who kept faith with the promise. And if you follow this telling, you may yet see how the tears of the prophet watered the soil of far-off isles, and how the seed of David found a resting place where the eagle of Babylon could never reach. From the Chronicles of Erie. In the days long forgotten, the stone was borne upon the shoulders of priests, wandering through the wilderness with rings of bronze at either end. And when the wilderness was past, the sea itself became their road, bearing them westward to the farthest edge of the sun's setting. With the stone came an aged guardian, whom the wise called Olamfola, the revealer, the prophet. And with him came a maiden of royal blood, Tefi, daughter of a king. There upon the green hill of Timhar, she was crowned beside Eochid, the Heremon, and the stone gave forth its voice beneath their feet. Chapter 1. The Siege of Jerusalem. The sound of ram's horns split the dawn. From the hills around Jerusalem, where the olive trees once cast their shade in peace, came the smoke of Babylonian fires. The plain below the city was no longer the pasture land of Judah, but a camp of iron, thousands of tents rising like a second city around the first. Siege towers, grim and towering, pressed against the walls, while engines hurled stones into the streets where children had once played. Within the gates, famine gnawed at the people as cruelly as the enemy without. Mothers clutched hollow-eyed infants, and merchants whose stalls had overflowed with grain now scraped the dust for crumbs. Priests stood in the temple courts, their voices thin, the great altar blackened with soot. And through it all moved Jeremiah, the prophet no one wished to hear, yet whose words burned hotter than the fires of Babylon. "Thus says the Lord," he cried, standing upon the steps of the ruined marketplace. This city shall be given into the hand of the king of Babylon. The house of David is cast down, the throne broken, yet the covenant shall not be forgotten. From the root that seems dead, a shoot shall yet spring forth. But the people covered their ears. Some spat, others cursed him as a traitor, and soldiers dragged him by the arms. They had cast him into the pit once already, and still he lived. He was the prophet of grief, the weeping voice that would not be silenced. On the palace mount, King Zedekiah trembled like a reed. His counselors urged him to surrender, but pride and fear warred within him. That night, under cover of darkness, he tried to flee through the gate of the fountain, but the Babylonians found him in the plains of Jericho. They slaughtered his sons before his eyes, then put out the king's sight so that the last vision burned into his mind was the death of his house. He was led away in chains to Babylon, yet one branch remained. For in the shadow of the burning palace, a girl of royal blood was hidden. She was young, scarcely more than a maiden, but she carried the lineage of David in her veins. Some whispered her name as T. Others guarded it in silence, but Jeremiah knew who she was. By divine command he became her protector, for though the house of Judah was cut down, the promise to David could not be severed. The Babylonians breached the gates and poured into the city like a flood. The holy vessels of the temple were seized, the golden lampstands carried away, the ark itself hidden or lost in the chaos. Fire roared through the courts of Solomon, licking the cedar beams until the glory of the house was ashes. Jeremiah wept as he walked among the ruins. His feet touched the stones of Zion now black with soot, and his tears fell upon the charred gates. He cried aloud, "O daughter of Zion, your beauty is departed, your crown cast down into the dust, but the Lord has not utterly forsaken you. Though you are scattered, you shall yet be gathered. Though your throne lies in ruins, a throne shall rise again in a land afar off." As dawn broke on the smouldering city, Jeremiah led the remnant that still clung to him. Among them were scribes carrying hidden scrolls, Levites with what treasures they could conceal, and the maiden of David's line, veiled against the eyes of Babylon. In their keeping also was a stone, plain and weather-worn, yet bound about with iron rings. Few knew its true name, but Jeremiah guarded it with reverence, for it was a witness to Jacob's dream and the covenant sworn at Bethel. Thus began the secret exile, not to Babylon as the captives, but into another path, a path that would lead far from the sight of kings. Jeremiah walked at the head, staff in hand, his face streaked with ash, yet his eyes set westward. For though he was the prophet of ruin, he was also the bearer of promise. And in the silence after the fires, when the cries of the city faded into memory, a new story began, a story that would reach beyond the deserts and seas, toward the isles at the edge of the world. Interlude 1. A lament at the gates. We sat by the gates of Zion and we wept, for her walls were cast down and her song silenced. The harp of David was broken, yet one string still whispered in the wind. The crown was trampled into the dust, the throne swallowed in fire and ashes. But a hand unseen gathered the ember, and a breath carried it westward like a spark. To the isles afar off shall the promise be sown, where the sea is wide and the sun sets in glory. There the stone shall cry out once more, and the covenant shall not be forgotten. Chapter 2. Flight into Egypt. The roads out of Jerusalem were filled with ruin. Corpses lay unburied in the valleys, the smell of smoke and death rising like incense to a foreign god. Jeremiah led the remnant southward, away from the great road east that bore the captives to Babylon. His heart trembled at the risk, For if the Babylonian captains caught them, all would be lost. Yet the word of the Lord pressed him on. Go down to Egypt, for there you shall keep the remnant until the appointed time. With him travelled Baruch the scribe, faithful even in despair, a small company of Levites who carried with them scraps of scrolls and fragments of song, and the maiden of David's line, her face veiled, her steps weary but unbroken. Some whispered that in her survival was a miracle greater than the fall itself, for through her the promise endured. They passed through Hebron, where the oaks of Mamre stood charred, and through the wilderness paths where Abraham had once pitched his tent. The land seemed to mourn its children, the wells dry, the vines withered. Yet in the silence of night, Jeremiah would stand apart, gazing westward, as though the wind itself spoke of another land across the sea. At last they reached the border streams of Egypt, where Pharaoh's garrisons watched the roads. To Tahpanhes they came, the fortress city at the mouth of the Nile. Its walls rose stark against the delta reeds, and its markets teemed with tongues from every nation. Here the remnant sought refuge, though Jeremiah's heart recoiled. For Egypt was the house of bondage, the place of old oppression, and he foresaw that judgment too would come upon it. The people begged him, "Speak to us, prophet. Shall we find peace here?" But Jeremiah answered with sorrow, "You seek safety in Pharaoh's shadow, yet his wings are but broken reeds. Egypt too shall fall, and her gods shall be brought low. Yet the remnant shall be preserved, for the Lord will plant his covenant where Pharaoh's hand cannot reach." Some mocked him still, weary of his voice of doom, yet others clung to his words, for in them was a hidden thread of hope. In Tahpanhes, the maiden was hidden in the house of Ishmael's kin, while Jeremiah and Baruch moved quietly among the traders. The stone was concealed beneath woven cloth, as though it were but a block of common burden. Yet when Jeremiah laid his hand upon it, he felt the weight of ages, as though Jacob's dream yet lingered within its cold surface. One night, as the Nile mist curled through the streets, Jeremiah dreamt. He saw a ladder rising not from Bethel, but from the edge of the western sea. Angels ascended and descended upon it, and at the top stood one like a son of man, whose voice said, "Fear not, servant, the covenant shall not die. You shall carry it to the land beyond the great waters, where my name shall be planted anew." Jeremiah awoke trembling, and Baruch asked him what he had seen. But the prophet answered only, "Write it not yet. The time will declare it." Thus in Egypt the remnant waited, hidden under Pharaoh's shadow, yet preparing for a greater journey, one that no man of Judah had ever dreamed, a voyage across the great deep toward the Isles of Destiny. Chapter 3. Shadows in Egypt. The sun of Mizraim burned white upon the walls of Tahpanhes, and the air was heavy with incense and the cries of priests. Jeremiah, aged now and gaunt, walked among the courtyards, like a man bearing an invisible fire upon his shoulders. Around him trailed Baruch, faithful scribe, carrying the last rolls of prophecy preserved from the ruins of Jerusalem. The princess Tatefi remained hidden under the guardianship of the prophet, though few knew her name or the hope she embodied. The remnant of Judah had found no rest in this land of idols. They had fled the sword of Babylon only to embrace the shadows of Egypt. At every gate stood images of falcon-headed gods. At every market stall, priests muttered charms to ward off spirits. Some of the refugees from Jerusalem bowed their heads to these rites, desperate for bread and protection. Their hearts, weary of exile, longed for safety, and they turned their eyes from the covenant. Jeremiah thundered against them. Did you not see the ruins of Zion? Did you not hear the cries of your sons in the valley of slaughter? And yet you turn to these gods who cannot speak, who cannot breathe. Egypt herself shall fall, and all who cling to her shall be as reeds broken in the marsh. Pharaoh's court took notice of him. Priests clad in linen and gold confronted the prophet. They mocked him for his ragged robe, for his foreign tongue, for the tears that seemed to well unbidden in his eyes. Yet some whispered in secret, for they had heard rumors of a God whose voice split mountains and laid empires low. One night, by the banks of the Nile, Jeremiah spoke softly to Baruch. The covenant cannot die in this land. Egypt shall be given into the hand of Babylon. But beyond these days, beyond this furnace of affliction, the Lord has kept for himself a remnant, and with them must travel the signs of his promise. He touched the veiled ark stone, not the ark entire, but the sacred stone of witness, carried upon poles as in the days of old. Only a few knew that such a relic still endured, wrapped in hides and borne on the shoulders of the faithful. Jeremiah guarded it with his life, for it was the pledge of kingship yet to come. And in the courts of Pharaoh, beneath gilded ceilings, a strange rumour began to spread, that the prophet from Zion carried with him the daughter of David's line. Interlude 1, the lament of Tahpanhes. By the walls of the strange city we sat and wept, our harps hung silent upon the palms of the Nile. The children of Egypt mocked our songs, saying, "Sing us a hymn of Zion, you broken ones." But how shall we sing the song of the Lord in a land of idols? The smoke of foreign altars choked our throats, and the river carried away our tears. Yet the prophet spoke, and his words were fire upon the reeds. The Lord has not forgotten his remnant, nor the throne of David, nor the stone beneath his covenant. Chapter 4. The Hidden Princess. The palace at Tahpanhes gleamed with painted columns, carved with lotus and papyrus, telling stories of pharaohs who had ruled since the dawn of the world. Yet among those storied halls now walked a girl whose lineage was older still, Tephi, daughter of David's line. Few spoke her name aloud, for to do so was to invite death from Babylon's spies and envy from Egypt's court. To most, she was merely a veiled handmaiden, silent at Jeremiah's side. But in secret gatherings, whispers grew. Servants told of her bearing, the grace in her walk, the fire in her eyes, the way she stood unmoved even when princes of Egypt leered. She carried herself not as a captive, but as one born to rule. Some said her voice carried the cadence of the Psalms when she prayed. One evening, in the cool shadows of an inner garden, Tephi was summoned by Nitocris, daughter of Pharaoh. Draped in linen like woven moonlight, Nitocris regarded her with curiosity. "You are not what you seem," she said softly, her voice like the hiss of the Nile's reeds. "I have watched you walk in silence. You are no servant." Tephi bowed her head, but her eyes did not falter. "I am only a remnant, as my people are a remnant. A daughter of a fallen house." Nitocris circled her, studying her. "And yet the prophet guards you, as though his life depends upon it. Tell me, child of Judah, is it true what the whispers say, that you are born of kings?" Tephi did not answer, but her silence spoke more than words. That night, Jeremiah warned her with stern compassion. "Be watchful, daughter. Egypt's court is a pit of serpents. They smile, but they plot. Already they dream of binding you to Pharaoh's line, to mix the blood of David with the gods of Mizraim. But the Lord has not preserved you for such a fate. You are to be a branch planted in another land, far from the shadow of Babylon, far from the idols of Egypt. Baruch, listening in silence, wrote the words carefully, for he saw in the maiden the spark of destiny. The days passed, and the intrigue thickened. Pharaoh's counselors debated whether the alliance of Judah's remnant could strengthen their defences against Babylon. Priests spoke of omens, a star rising in the west, a lioness carrying her cub across the sea. In the marketplaces, merchants whispered of the stone of witness that followed the prophet. And in the chambers of power, some began to see Tifi not as a refugee, but as a key. A bride to bind nations, or a hostage to secure alliances. Jeremiah alone knew the truth, that her path did not end in Egypt, nor in Babylon, but beyond the seas, where ancient hills waited for the planting of a new throne. Interlude 2, the Song of the Hidden Daughter. Veiled she walked through foreign courts, yet her brow bore the crown of Zion. The daughters of Egypt beheld her grace, and princes envied the fire in her eyes. Not for Pharaoh was she preserved, nor for the gods of stone and falcon, but for the isles of the setting sun, where the covenant shall take root again. Guard her well, O prophet of sorrow, for kings and nations wait unknowing. From her shall spring a hope unbroken, and the stone shall cry beneath her feet. Chapter 5. The Trial of the Court. Whispers had grown into currents, and currents into schemes. Pharaoh's counselors, alarmed at the prophet's stern warnings and intrigued by the veiled maiden who followed him, resolved to test the truth of these foreigners from Judah. A banquet was called, rich with roasted fowl, honeyed wine, and musicians strumming harps of ebony. Priests of Ra and Isis gathered in their gilded robes, and captains of Pharaoh's guard sat in their bronze helmets, their eyes sharp as blades. At the high table Jeremiah and his remnant were summoned, not as honoured guests, but as curiosities to be displayed. Tefi walked behind the prophet, her veil lowered, her steps steady. The torches along the hall threw firelight across her face, and the princes murmured among themselves. Nitocris, daughter of Pharaoh, leaned upon her seat with a smile that was not unkind, but edged with intent. "Come, prophet of Judah," the high priest declared. "We have heard of your God who burns cities and topples thrones. Show us his power here in the land of the Nile. Speak an omen that we may judge your words." Jeremiah's eyes were like coals, his voice steady as he answered, "You have already seen the omen. For Babylon rises even now, a storm upon the desert, and Egypt's idols will be as wax before the fire. But you harden your hearts as Pharaoh of old did, and the plagues shall return upon this land." The hall grew restless, mutters spreading. Some laughed, others frowned. Then Nitocris spoke with a serpent's subtlety. "And what of the maiden you keep hidden, O prophet? Who is she, that she walks with the dignity of a queen, yet hides her face in our presence? Shall she not also speak?" All eyes turned to Tefi. For a moment she stood still, her heart beating like the wings of a bird. Jeremiah opened his mouth to shield her, but the girl lifted her veil herself. Her face, pale yet radiant, shone in the firelight. The room hushed. "My name is not for your tongues," she said in a clear voice. "I am the daughter of a fallen house, yet my God lives. You ask for signs, yet your own walls are signs painted with gods who cannot hear. Look to the north, to the sandstorms that rise. The conqueror you fear is at the gates, and none of your idols shall stand. Her words, though few, rang with a strength beyond her years. Some of the priests hissed in anger, others sat back in awe. Nitocris herself regarded her with narrowed eyes, admiration mingled with calculation. That night, in secret chambers, counsellors whispered, "She must be of royal blood. Such fire is not found in slaves. If she be daughter of kings, she might be a bride to strengthen Egypt's hand. Or she is a danger. Better to silence her, lest Babylon claim her as prize." Thus, the net closed tighter around the remnant, even as Jeremiah prepared for the sign the Lord commanded him to give. Interlude 3, fragment from the Annals of Eri. A maiden came veiled into Pharaoh's hall, and princes rose from their seats to behold her. Her voice was as a flame in the desert wind, and her words shook the hearts of the mighty. Not with crown nor scepter she stood, but with the hidden strength of Zion, and those who plotted to bind her found their schemes turned to ash in their hands. Chapter 6. Schemes of the Serpent Court. In the shadowed corridors of Tahpanhes, the laughter of the banquet faded, but its consequences did not. Tephi's unveiled words had unsettled Egypt's lords. To some, she was a prize to be seized, to others, a threat to be silenced. That very night, the high priest of Ptah gathered with Pharaoh's counsellors in a chamber lit by oil lamps shaped like cobras. Scrolls of omens lay across the floor, and the smoke of incense curled upward like whispering spirits. "She is no handmaiden," hissed the priest, his painted eyes glinting. "The blood of kings runs in her veins. The prophet guards her because she is the jewel of his people. If Babylon learns of her, they will claim her as bride or hostage, and the remnant of Judah will rise again beneath their shadow." A general of Pharaoh's guard slammed his fist upon the table. "Then let us take her first. If she be wed into the line of Pharaoh, the throne of David shall be swallowed into the house of Ra. Let Babylon choke on ashes while Egypt inherits the blood of Zion." But Nitocris, Pharaoh's daughter, spoke with calm venom. "You fools, do you not see? She is no trinket to be claimed, no pawn to be moved. The girl is a torch, and torches burn what they touch. Bind her to Egypt, and Babylon's wrath will double. Slay her, and the prophet's words will cry against us in every street. No, we must draw her out carefully, test her will, discover where her strength lies." The council murmured, divided between greed, fear, and cunning. In the end, they resolved on a middle path. Tephi would be pressed with offers of safety, finery, and even a royal betrothal. Should she refuse, subtler snares would follow. Thus began the testing of the hidden princess. Day by day, gifts were sent, silken robes dyed with lapis, golden necklaces, vessels of alabaster. Servants whispered promises. You could be mistress of Egypt, queen beside Pharaoh's heir. Why cling to the prophet's sorrows when the Nile offers abundance? Tephi received them with quiet courtesy, but her heart remained firm. She clothed herself in plain garments and turned her eyes toward heaven rather than the splendor of men. At night, she prayed beside Jeremiah, her voice steadied despite her youth. "Lord of my fathers, I am but a branch cut from the tree of David. Plant me where you will, but let me not be consumed in the fires of Egypt." Jeremiah would lay his weathered hand upon her head, blessing her in silence. He knew the snares around her grew tighter each day, and he knew the hour was near when the Lord would speak not only through warning, but through a sign carved into the very stones of Egypt. Interlude 4, the testing of the daughter. They brought her silks, but she wrapped herself in the mantle of prayer. They offered her gold, but her heart was set on the covenant. Princes whispered of thrones and marriages, but she turned her ear to the prophet's words. Thus the maiden stood unyielding, as a flame untouched by the wind, and Egypt's court trembled, for they had tested her and found in her the strength of Zion's kings. Chapter 7. The sign at Tahpanhes. The air of Tahpanhes was heavy with the smell of stone dust and clay ovens. At the gate of Pharaoh's palace lay a great brickwork pavement where servants once baked tiles for the halls of the kings. It was there that the Lord's word came to Jeremiah, fierce and unyielding. "Take great stones in your hand," the voice commanded, "and hide them in the clay beneath the pavement at the entry of Pharaoh's house. Do this in the sight of the men of Judah. Then declare, 'Thus says the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, Behold, I will send my servant Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, and he shall set his throne upon these stones that I have hidden. He shall spread his canopy over them and smite the land of Egypt.'" At dawn, Jeremiah rose, his cloak whipping in the desert wind. Baruch walked beside him with ink-stained hands, while a small crowd of exiles and Egyptians followed out of curiosity. Among them, veiled and watchful, walked Tefi, her eyes wide with the weight of what she knew must come. Before the palace gate, Jeremiah knelt. With a mason's hammer, he pried open the edge of the pavement, pulling stones loose until the clay beneath gaped like a wound. Into that hollow, he laid great unhewn rocks, their surfaces marked with ancient cuts, perhaps from Zion itself. The priests of Egypt watched with disdain. "What madness is this?" they scoffed. "Does the old man play at burying relics like charms against spirits?" But Jeremiah rose, his face blazing. He lifted his hands toward the sky. "Behold, these stones shall bear witness. Upon this very place shall stand the throne of Babylon. The king of the north shall pitch his pavilion here, and Egypt shall drink the cup of wrath. Your gods of falcon and cat shall not save you. Your armies shall be broken as reeds in the marsh." The crowd gasped. Some mocked, others trembled. Soldiers gripped their spears, uneasy at the prophet's fire. Nitocris, daughter of Pharaoh, stepped forward, her voice sharp as a blade. "Old man, you curse the throne of Egypt in its very gates. Do you not fear our gods or the wrath of Pharaoh?" Jeremiah turned, his eyes burning like coals. "I fear the Lord alone, who made heaven and earth, and this maiden whom you would bind to your idols. She is his vessel, and she shall not remain in your snare. Egypt will fall, Babylon will pass, but the covenant shall endure." Gasps rippled through the court. Tefi felt her heart surge with both dread and hope. For in that moment, the truth of her destiny shone like the sun breaking through storm clouds. Pharaoh's counselors seethed. Some plotted her immediate capture. Others urged patience, fearing Babylon's swift hand. Yet Jeremiah's act had planted more than stones beneath the pavement. He had planted terror in Egypt's heart, and a seed of hope in the remnant of Judah. And in the silence that followed, the wind carried the faint sound of distant thunder from the north, though no storm clouds yet touched the sky. Interlude 5. The stones at the gate. Beneath the palace gate he laid them, unhewn stones from Zion's ruin. Not for charm nor spell he hid them, but as a throne for the conqueror's canopy. The priests laughed, the captains mocked, yet the earth trembled at the words, for the prophet spoke of fire and sword and the fall of Egypt's pride. The maiden heard and trembled not, for the stones bore witness to her path, and in their silence they declared, "The covenant shall not die." Chapter 8. the gathering shadow. The dust from Jeremiah's hammering had scarcely settled before the court of Egypt was in uproar. The priests of Ptah and Ra howled for his death, calling him a blasphemer who cursed the gods of the Nile in their very temple gate. Captains of Pharaoh's guard urged restraint, for they had seen the people murmur in fear, and they feared that slaying the prophet would spark unrest among the Judean exiles. Pharaoh himself, aloof upon his throne, issued only one command: watch him. Let his steps be measured. If his words prove false, the gods will reveal it, and if true, we shall act as Egypt always has, with cunning. Thus Jeremiah and his remnant were neither cast out nor slain, but shadowed by spies in every street. The prophet, undaunted, walked as though angels guarded his path. But by night, in hidden chambers, he gathered Tephi and Baruch close. "The snare tightens," he said, voice heavy with weariness. "The hand of Babylon is already stretched out over this land. Egypt will not save us, nor will Babylon spare us. The Lord has shown me a road beyond the reach of both, but it is long, and the sea itself stands between. You, daughter, are the key, for in you the covenant yet breathes." Tephi bowed her head, her dark hair falling like a veil. "I am young, my lord, and I do not know the way. But if the Lord has called me, I will walk where he leads." Baruch's hands shook as he unrolled a fresh scroll. "Then it must be written, lest the days to come swallow the memory. The throne of David is not broken, but transplanted. And the stone, though buried in Egypt's dust, shall rise again in another land." Outside, unrest began to stir. Rumors of Babylon's armies marching toward the delta spread like fire in dry grass. Merchants cursed their gods in secret, soldiers muttered of omens, and even priests whispered that perhaps the Judean prophet's words had weight. Among Pharaoh's counselors, schemes hardened. Some urged that Tephi be seized at once, forced into betrothal with Pharaoh's house, binding Judah's remnant to Egypt. Others counselled her quiet death, fearing Babylon might claim her as a prize. Nitocris alone counselled patience, her sharp eyes fixed on the maiden as though trying to pierce her very soul. Meanwhile, Jeremiah prepared in silence. Trusted hands among the exiles gathered provisions in secret. Sailors from Tyre, owing favours long buried, were summoned quietly to the harbours. And in the stillness of the night, the prophet prayed over the hidden stone, veiled in its coverings, its weight a reminder of the burden he bore. "Lord of hosts," he whispered, "make a path through the seas, as you did in the days of Moses. Preserve the remnant, plant the root anew, and let not the flame of David's line be quenched." And even as he prayed, a messenger from the north slipped into the city, with dust upon his garments and terror in his eyes. Babylon had crossed the border. Interlude 6. The Whisper of the North. From the desert rose a sound, not of storm nor of wind, but of armies like locusts in flight, their banners darkening the sun. Egypt trembled, her priests clutched their idols, but the prophet's words had gone before them, and the stones cried out from beneath the gate. The maiden waited, her heart unshaken, for she was to be carried westward, beyond the sword of Babylon. Chapter 8 continued. The courtiers whispered, though always when her back was turned, for they feared the prophet's stern visage more than they feared Pharaoh. One murmured that the girl was a shadow of old Jerusalem, a spark too small to warm a hearth, let alone a kingdom. Another, leaning close to a priest of Ptah, hinted that perhaps she was the bait by which Egypt might snare the remnant of Judah into submission. And yet, against their whispers, Tephi carried herself as though a mantle were upon her shoulders, not of silk nor linen, but of something invisible, an inheritance stitched by unseen hands. Pharaoh watched her keenly. There were banquets where he commanded her to sit beside him, bidding her speak of her homeland's hills, of the temple that once crowned Zion. He would tilt his head, feigning curiosity, but in truth, measuring whether her words carried the fire of a queen or merely the sighs of an exile. One evening, after the musicians had hushed their flutes and the oil lamps flickered against gilded walls, Pharaoh's vizier leaned to him and said, "Great one, the child speaks as though she would build kingdoms out of ashes. Should she be permitted to gather allies among your lords? Might she not rouse sympathies dangerous to your throne?" Pharaoh's smile was slow, curling like incense smoke. "Then let us test her, as a hawk tests the wind. If she is but chaff, the breeze shall scatter her. If she is iron, we shall know soon enough." Thus began the subtle trials. A poet was ordered to mock her lineage in verse before the whole court. Tephi, though her cheeks burned crimson, answered with a psalm upon her lips, words of her father's rising above laughter until the hall grew still. Next, a priest of Isis confronted her with riddles drawn from Egyptian law. Yet she, remembering Jeremiah's teachings, answered each in turn with the sayings of Solomon, and the court marveled at her quickness. Finally, Pharaoh himself drew her into discourse. "Tell me, daughter of Judah," he said with measured tone, "what claim has one so young cast from her city over the crowns of kings? Speak that Egypt may hear." A hush fell. Tephi rose, and though her hands trembled, her eyes were steadfast. She lifted the bronze scepter Pharaoh had placed before her, not as a gift, but as a test, and in a voice that carried to the farthest colonnade she declared, "The throne is not mine by power, nor by sword, nor by Egypt's indulgence. It is mine by covenant. The Lord of hosts hath sworn to David, saying, There shall not fail thee a man to sit upon the throne of Israel." Though Jerusalem is fallen, that word yet stands. I am the remnant, and in me the promise is hidden. Her words struck like a stone upon still water, sending ripples through every soul present. Some murmured in awe, others clenched fists in anger. The vizier paled. Pharaoh himself sat unmoving, his gaze hard as carved basalt. But within that silence, Jeremiah bowed his head, for he knew that the child had at last spoken the prophecy aloud, and from that moment nothing would be as before. Chapter 9. Shadows in Pharaoh's hall. The silence that followed Tephi's bold claim lingered like a blade, drawn but not yet struck. For a heartbeat the vast chamber seemed suspended, the painted gods on the pillars staring down with stone eyes, bearing witness to her words. Then came the stirrings, whispers, shuffling feet, the hiss of linen robes against marble. The priests of Amun muttered darkly among themselves. One of them, his headdress heavy with gold, bent low to the vizier and said, "Mark this. If the child's God still grants her kingship, then our temples are as dust, and the gods of Egypt mocked. Will Pharaoh endure such a slight beneath his very roof?" The vizier, pale and thin as parchment, replied with a serpent's calm, "Let her speak of covenant and throne. Words are no army, yet words can grow teeth if left unbridled. We must either silence her tongue or harness it for our purpose." Pharaoh did not answer at once. His gaze had not left Tephi, who now stood with hands folded, the bronze scepter laid gently before her once more. Her courage had not faltered, though her breath came quickly. When at last he spoke, his voice was smooth, deliberate. "Daughter of Judah, your claim is lofty. Lofty claims demand lofty proof. You say you are the vessel of your God's covenant, then let your God deliver you. Until that day you shall dwell in Egypt as guest, though not as queen." A tremor of laughter, forced and uncertain, rippled through the hall. Some courtiers nodded eagerly, relieved that Pharaoh had given no outright endorsement. Others frowned, for they heard in his words neither dismissal nor acceptance, but something more dangerous: delay. That night, the plotting deepened. The priests of Ptah whispered of poisons hidden in honeyed wine. The captains of Pharaoh's guard debated whether to shadow Jeremiah more closely, for fear that he plotted rebellion among the Hebrew exiles. And in hidden corners, some of Pharaoh's concubines, curious of the girl's defiance, whispered that perhaps destiny truly clung to her. Jeremiah, keen-eyed and unyielding, read the shifting air. He walked the palace gardens beneath torchlight, listening to the rustle of papyrus reeds, praying for counsel. In dreams, he saw the shadow of a great lion devouring Egypt's idols and a path cut through desert sands toward the setting sun. He awoke with resolve. Egypt would not be their resting place. But the prophet also knew that leaving would not be simple. Pharaoh's heart was not hardened enough to cast them out, nor softened enough to release them. A snare was being woven, silken threads of hospitality that, once tightened, would bind them as prisoners. So Jeremiah waited. He spoke little in the court, but his silence carried weight. He taught Titefi by lamplight, grounding her courage in the Psalms of David, and he watched with wary eyes, knowing the moment would come when the word of the Lord would break upon them like thunder, commanding them to flee. And so Egypt's hall of splendor grew daily more restless, until it seemed the very walls strained to hear whether Judah's God would prove himself, or whether the gods of Egypt would claim the last word. Chapter 10. The Vision of Escape. The nights in Tahpanhes had grown long and restless. From the north came whispers carried by merchants with dust upon their cloaks. Babylon was moving again. Pharaoh's captains denied it in the court, but their eyes betrayed unease. The air itself seemed to tremble, heavy with waiting. Jeremiah, worn by years of sorrow and fire, slept in a chamber overlooking the reed marshes of the Nile. His body lay upon the mat, but his spirit was drawn upward as though by unseen hands. He stood in a dream upon a desert plain. Before him rose a ladder of fire stretching into the heavens, its rungs formed of storm cloud and lightning. Upon it moved angels, ascending and descending, their faces like burning bronze. The sound of their voices was like the sea in tempest, and their cry shook the sand beneath his feet. The covenant is not broken. The flame is not quenched. Carry the promise to the isles afar off, where the sun goes down and the sea is wide. Then the ladder turned, and he saw it lean not upon Zion, nor upon Babylon, but upon the edge of the western ocean. A ship appeared there, its sails swollen with wind, its prow crowned with a lion. Beneath its deck rested the stone of witness, and over it hovered a flame that would not die. Jeremiah fell upon his face. "Lord, how shall I bear this burden? I am but an old man, despised by kings, hunted by enemies. The sea is vast, the way unknown." And the voice answered, "Not by your strength, but by mine. For as I led your fathers through the Red Sea, so I shall open a path through the waters for you. Fear not, O prophet of sorrow, for the maiden shall be planted where Babylon's talons cannot reach. There shall the throne endure until the day of the anointed." When Jeremiah awoke, His face was wet with tears. Baruch stirred beside him, clutching a scroll against his breast. "My master," he whispered, "you cried out in your sleep. What did you see?" Jeremiah placed a trembling hand upon his scribe's shoulder. "A road through the sea, Baruch, a throne beyond the setting sun. It is time we prepared, for the Lord's hand is moving." That very dawn, Babylon's scouts crossed into Egypt. Their chariots wheeled through the sand like storms made flesh. Smoke rose from border towns, and refugees flooded Tahpanhes with tales of slaughter. Panic spread through the markets. Priests wailed in their temples, crying for their gods to awaken. Pharaoh raged, but his captains whispered of retreat. Within the court, intrigue boiled over. Some pressed harder to bind Tay-Tefi in marriage to the house of Pharaoh, believing her bloodline would shield them. Others called for her death, lest Babylon discover her and claim her as prize. Nitocris alone counselled patience, her eyes always fixed upon the veiled maiden, as though she were deciphering a riddle none else could read. That night, Jeremiah gathered the remnant in secret. In a dim chamber lit by a single oil lamp, he spoke. "The hour is come. Egypt is falling beneath the sword of Babylon. We cannot remain. The Lord has shown me a vision. We must flee to the sea. There a ship waits, and upon it the covenant shall cross the waters." Baruch's pen scratched furiously across parchment. The Levites exchanged uneasy glances. One muttered, "To the sea. That is madness. Who has charted such waters? Who knows what lies beyond?" Jeremiah's eyes blazed. "The Lord who split the Red Sea, who led our fathers by pillar of fire, he has spoken. Will you doubt him now, at the edge of destruction? Better to trust his promise than Pharaoh's broken reed or Babylon's chain." At his words, silence fell. Then Tay-Tefi rose. Though young, her voice carried with the calm of one who had faced temptation and endured. "If the Lord has spoken, then we must go. I am ready. Whatever lies beyond the sea, his hand will guide us there." Jeremiah looked upon her with weary pride. "So speaks the daughter of David. May the Lord plant you where no enemy may uproot you." Thus began their secret preparations. Tyrian sailors, long allies of Judah, had been bribed and pledged to carry them under the guise of traders. Grain and water were stored aboard the vessel. The stone of witness, veiled in cloth and bound with ropes, was smuggled to the harbour under night's cover. And in hushed corners, Jeremiah prayed with outstretched arms, begging the Lord for mercy upon their journey. Meanwhile, Babylon drew nearer. By the week's end, smoke rose on the horizon. By the next, refugees filled Tahpanhes with tales of Nebuchadnezzar's fury. The Egyptian court wavered between defiance and collapse. And in the secret watches of the night, Jeremiah felt the fire of his vision burn ever brighter. The ladder rising above the sea, the promise carried westward, the covenant unbroken. Interlude 7. The Dream of the Prophet. Upon my bed I saw the fire, a ladder rising into the storm. Angels moved like flames of bronze, their voices thundering across the sand. Not Zion, not Babylon, bore the weight, but the rim of the western sea. There a ship was crowned with flame, and the stone glowed with living light. "Fear not," they cried, "for the covenant is not broken. The throne shall be planted in the isles afar off." Chapter 11. The Fall of Egypt. The first thunder of Babylon's approach was not heard but seen. Columns of smoke rose along the northern roads, black pillars against the desert sky. Merchants staggered into Tapanis with terror in their eyes, their donkeys laden not with goods, but with weeping children. "The Chaldeans are come!" they cried. "Their chariots devour the sand, their archers darken the sun. No wall can stand before them." Within Pharaoh's palace the halls trembled with shouts. Captains argued over strategies. Priests cut themselves before their gods, begging for signs. Some claimed victory was certain, others whispered of doom. Yet in every chamber the unspoken dread was clear. The old man from Judah had spoken true. Jeremiah, standing in the shadow of the gate, wept as he heard the cries. "Egypt shall stumble as a drunkard," he murmured, "and Babylon shall tread her vineyards until none remain." That night, Babylon's vanguard swept upon Tahpanhes like a storm. Their chariots struck sparks from the stones, their swords gleamed in the torchlight. Pharaoh's guards fought bravely at the gates, but the tide of men was endless. Flaming arrows fell upon the city. The shriek of women and the clash of bronze filled the air. The priests of Ptah fled from their temple, clutching idols of gold. But when they reached the streets, the invaders cut them down, their treasures spilling into the dust. The statue of Isis was toppled from her shrine, her face broken, her body dragged through the mud. And in every corner, Jeremiah's words echoed, "Your gods shall be as wax before the fire." In the chaos, Pharaoh's counselors made their move. Guards were dispatched to seize the veiled maiden. "Take her!" they cried. "Let her be offered as bride to Babylon, or slain lest her blood strengthen them." But Jeremiah had foreseen their scheme. Guided by Baruch and a band of faithful Levites, he led Tetefi through a hidden way beneath the palace gardens. Flames licked the sky above, casting their path in crimson. Twice they were nearly caught by soldiers, once by Egyptians, once by Chaldeans. But each time they slipped away, the prophet's staff raised like a beacon in the dark. Jeremiah's remnant moved swiftly, guided by sailors of Tyre who had long dealt in secret with Judah. Cloaked and silent, they slipped down alleys choked with smoke, carrying what few treasures remained: the scrolls, the stone, and the living hope of David's line. At the dockside, the Tyrian captain gestured urgently. "Quickly!" The Chaldeans scour the city. By sunrise, the harbour will be theirs. His voice was low, but his eyes betrayed awe as he glanced at the covered stone heavy upon its cart. "Is it true, prophet, that this burden is the stair to heaven?" Jeremiah's gaze was stern. "It is the witness of the covenant. Guard it with your life, for kingdoms will rise and fall upon it." The sailors bent their backs and heaved the stone into the ship's hold. Each groaned under its weight, yet none dared speak against it. Above, the night wind shifted, carrying with it the scent of rain. The vessel loosed its ropes and slipped into the channel. At the harbour, the Tyrian ship awaited. Its sails hung furled, its crew anxious in the din of war. The stone of witness, wrapped in cloth, lay hidden in the hold like a heart within a chest. Jeremiah placed his hand upon it and whispered, "The covenant travels with us. Let Babylon rage. Let Egypt burn. The promise endures." Behind them the city roared with fire and death. Pharaoh's banners fell, trampled under Babylon's chariots. The once proud gods of Egypt lay in shards among the ashes. Tetefi stood at the ship's stern, her veil thrown back. She gazed upon the burning horizon, and though her eyes filled with tears, her voice was steady. Jerusalem fell. Egypt falls. but the Lord does not fall. If he carries us across the waters, then I will bear his covenant wherever he plants me. Jeremiah, weary yet unbroken, raised his hands to bless her. Daughter of David, the Lord himself shall be your covering. Beyond the sea lies the soil where the throne shall be planted. Courage now, for the way is long. The sailors loosed the ropes. The vessel glided from the dock, its prow cutting the blood-red water. Behind them, Tahpanhes screamed beneath Babylon's sword. Ahead lay the great sea, wide and unknown. And thus the prophet, the princess, and the remnant of Judah departed Egypt, carrying with them the hidden flame of the covenant. Interlude 8. The cry of Tahpanhes. Woe to the city of Pharaoh! Her walls are broken, her gates consumed. The gods she trusted lie shattered in the dust, their faces ground beneath the heel of strangers. The priests cried out, but none answered. The captains fought, but their swords grew dull. Babylon swept like fire in the reeds, and the Nile wept crimson to the sea. Yet a remnant fled by secret path, a prophet, a maiden, a stone of witness. And the promise, though nations fell, was carried upon the tide. Chapter 12. Flight to the Sea. The harbour of Tahpanhes was a chaos of fire and fear. Babylon's torches lit the sky like a second dawn, while the cries of the dying echoed against the black water. The Nile's waters shimmered in the moonlight, but the sky above grew black with storm. By the time the city of Tahpanhes burned behind them, the heavens themselves unleashed their fury. Lightning split the darkness. Waves rose high, crashing upon the deck like beasts of the deep. The sailors shouted in Phoenician, straining against the ropes, but fear gnawed at even their seasoned hearts. The remnant wailed, crying that they would be swallowed in the deep before they had even reached open sea. Tefi stood among them, her veil soaked and clinging to her face, her hair whipped by the storm. She grasped the mast with one hand and raised her voice above the chaos. Be not afraid. The Lord who parted the Red Sea is with us. He has called us to the waters, and he shall carry us through them. Her words struck the hearts of the exiles like a torch in the night. Some ceased their wailing, others clung to her voice as to a rope. Jeremiah, kneeling in the hold with the stone, prayed aloud, O Lord of hosts, remember your covenant. Let not the waves devour your promise, nor the deep silence your throne. As you carried Noah through the flood, so carry us across the sea. The storm raged for 3 days and nights. Rain fell like spears. Winds howled as if Babylon's gods pursued them across the waters. Yet through it all, the ship did not sink. The mast bent but did not break. The ropes frayed but held. And the stone, though hidden, seemed to anchor the vessel, as though the deep itself dared not claim it. On the 4th dawn, the storm broke. Sunlight spilled across the sea, glinting on waves now calm as glass. The sailors, exhausted, fell upon the deck with tears of relief. Baruch unrolled his damp scroll and scratched with trembling hands. The Lord has borne us through the waters. His covenant endures, though nations fall. Tefi stood at the prow, her garments torn by wind, her eyes fixed westward. In her heart burned a strange certainty, that beyond the horizon lay the land promised in Jeremiah's dream, a land where the stone would cry out beneath kings, where the covenant would take root again. Jeremiah emerged from the hold, his beard matted with salt, his eyes hollow from sleepless nights of prayer. He laid his hand upon the maiden's shoulder. "Daughter of David, you have stood unshaken in the storm. Truly, the Lord has chosen you to bear his promise. The sea has tested you, and you have not faltered." She bowed her head, but her voice was strong. "Not I, my lord, but the God of Israel. His hand alone preserved us." Together they gazed westward where the sea met the sky, endless and unknown. Behind them the smoke of Egypt's ruin was lost to the horizon. Before them lay only mystery, yet also hope. Thus the remnant sailed into the great deep, leaving behind Babylon's fury and Pharaoh's fall, bearing with them the covenant that could not die. Interlude 9. The Song of the Sea Road. We passed through the waters. The storm beat upon us. The waves roared like lions, but the Lord was our shield. The stone lay hidden. The maiden stood firm, and the prophet wept prayers that rose like incense above the storm. When dawn broke, the sea was calm as glass. We set our faces westward, toward the land of the setting sun. Chapter 13. The Covenant carried west. For many days the sea was their world. The coast of Egypt faded into memory, its smoke vanishing like a ghost upon the horizon. The sailors steered steadily northwest, their eyes wary of Babylonian ships, their hands hardened by years of Tyrian trade. The remnant of Judah huddled on the deck, their garments stiff with salt. Some still wept for Zion, others for the fall of Tahpanhes, but in their hearts stirred a strange mixture of grief and hope. They had not been cast into chains as their brethren in Babylon. They carried with them a promise, hidden yet alive. Jeremiah spent his hours in the hold beside the stone. He touched its cold surface with calloused fingers, whispering prayers that seemed to rise from the deep itself. Baruch sat nearby, scratching with weary hand upon his dampened scrolls. "Write this, my son," Jeremiah murmured. "Write that the covenant has crossed the waters. Write that the throne of David is not dead, but transplanted, as a vine is cut and planted anew in distant soil." Above them, Titifi moved among the remnant. Though her years were few, she bore herself with the bearing of a queen. She comforted the children with songs of Zion, her voice steady as the waves. She spoke to the women of courage, reminding them that they were not widows of a dead nation, but the mothers of a promise, yet to blossom. Even the sailors found themselves stirred by her presence, whispering that she was no ordinary maiden, but a flame carried from a ruined temple. At last, the ship came to the narrow straits where the sea is pressed between two mighty cliffs, the Pillars of Hercules, gateway to the great deep. The sailors crossed themselves in Phoenician fashion, for they believed beyond lay monsters, whirlpools, and the edge of the world. But Jeremiah's eyes kindled with fire. He raised his staff toward the western horizon. "Behold," he cried, "the isles afar off of which the Lord spoke. Beyond these pillars lies the land where the covenant shall be planted. Fear not the waters, for the hand of the Lord guides us still." The ship entered the straits. Wind rushed through like the breath of some ancient beast, whipping the sails taut. The cliffs loomed high on either side, carved with shapes that seemed half natural, half the work of forgotten gods. The sailors trembled, but the vessel passed unharmed. And when at last they emerged into the vast Atlantic, the sea spread before them like a road of glass stretching into eternity. It was then that Jeremiah was given his final vision of that age. His body trembled, his eyes lifted to the heavens. He saw the green hills of a far land, mist curling upon them like veils. He saw a hill crowned with a stone, and upon it stood kings with sceptres in their hands, while the stone itself cried out beneath their feet. He saw nations rising from that throne, stretching across the seas until the ends of the earth were touched, and above it all shone a light brighter than the sun, the promise of the anointed yet to come. When the vision passed, Jeremiah sank to his knees. "Lord," he whispered, "let me decrease, but let your promise endure. Let the maiden be planted, let the stone bear witness, let the covenant live though kingdoms perish." Tephi, hearing his cry, knelt beside him. "What did you see, my master?" Jeremiah laid a trembling hand upon her head. "I saw your destiny, child of David. You shall not reign in Zion, but upon the green hills of the west. From you shall flow a line unbroken until the fullness of time comes. The covenant is not ended, it has only begun anew." Baruch, silent and awestruck, wrote the words with reverent care. Thus was begun the hidden chronicle, that the memory would not die. And so the ship sailed westward, beyond the sight of the known world. Behind them lay ruin, Jerusalem in ashes, Egypt fallen beneath Babylon's heel. Before them lay mystery, lands of mist and stone, of kings and druids, where prophecy and legend would entwine. The prophet wept, the maiden sang, the sailors rowed, and the stone lay silent in the hold, bearing upon its shoulders the weight of a throne yet to be revealed. Thus ended the first part of their journey, the fall and the exile. And thus began a new chapter, hidden from the eyes of Babylon, whispered only in fragments of song and legend, the planting of the covenant in the isles afar off. Interlude 10. Fragment of the Isles. From the east there came a prophet, and with him a maiden of royal blood. They bore a stone across the waters, heavy with the voice of God. Upon the hills of the far green land, the stone was set, and it cried aloud. Kings rose and fell upon its back, yet the covenant endured. And though the world forgot their names, the isles remembered in song. A flame came westward with a prophet's tears, and the throne was planted anew. Epilogue. The ashes and the horizon. So it was that Jerusalem fell, and Egypt with her. Babylon's eagle spread its wings from the Euphrates to the Nile, and no kingdom withstood it. Thrones were cast down, temples broken, idols scattered to the dust. Nations mourned, and the songs of Zion were hushed in foreign lands. Yet hidden in the ruin, the covenant endured. Not in the courts of Babylon, nor in the palaces of Pharaoh, but in a remnant carried upon the sea. A prophet wept beside a silent stone. A maiden bore within her the flame of David's line, and a scribe wrote by trembling lamplight the record of their exile. These were not victories of armies, nor glories of empire. They were seeds, small and hidden, scattered upon the waters. Seeds that would take root in far soil, where the eagle of Babylon could never reach. The chronicles of men do not record their path. The scrolls of kings tell only of conquests and crowns. Yet in the whispers of bards, in the fragments of Celtic annals, in the songs of the West, there remain echoes of a prophet from the East, of a princess veiled, of a stone that cried beneath the feet of kings. Thus ends the first hidden chronicle, the fall and the exile. The story does not end in ashes, but in horizon. For the covenant was not quenched in Jerusalem's fire, nor drowned in Egypt's flood. It was carried westward, borne upon the great deep, toward the misty isles where prophecy and legend entwine. And there, beyond the sight of Babylon, the covenant would find new soil, and the flame would burn again.